The marble floor of the executive boardroom gleamed so brightly that 10-year-old Marcus Chen could see his reflection in it, a small, thin boy in clothes that had been mended too many times. Standing next to his mother, who gripped her cleaning cart like a lifeline. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwell, Alina," Chen whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the air conditioning that kept the 47 room at a perfect 60 degrees. "My babysitter got sick, and I couldn't find anyone to watch Marcus. It won't happen again," Richard Blackwell, CEO of Titan Industries and a man whose personal wealth exceeded the GDP of small nations, didn't even look up from the massive digital display where a complex logistics equation glowed in angry red text. 3 weeks, 52 consultants with degrees from MIT, Stanford, and Oxford. $300,000 in consulting fees. And still, no solution. "Better not," he said, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to worry about childcare, or rent, or whether there would be food on the table tomorrow. "This is the most important meeting of the quarter. We have 11 board members waiting, and I can solve this all by myself," Marcus said. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Slowly, Richard Blackwell turned. 11 board members representing billions in collective wealth followed his gaze to the small boy who'd just spoken. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Catherine Morrison, pharmaceutical heiress and board member, erupted into laughter so violent she had to clutch her stomach. "Oh my God," she gasped. "Is this some kind of performance art? Richard, where did you find this entertainment?" The laughter spread like wildfire. Robert Sutton, construction magnate, slammed both hands on the mahogany table. "This is pure gold. Kid, do you even know what an equation is?" Marcus felt his mother's hand on his shoulder, trembling. "Please," Alina begged, pulling him back. "Marcus, don't say anything more. We need to go." But something in Marcus had broken. Or perhaps, more accurately, something had finally snapped into place. He'd watched his mother scrub toilets for 6 years while these people tracked mud across floors she'd just cleaned. He'd seen her hands crack and bleed from chemicals while they complained that their coffee wasn't hot enough. He'd held her while she cried because someone had left a mess in the bathroom with a note that said, "That's what we pay you for." And now they were laughing at him. "My mother doesn't have to apologize for existing," Marcus said, his voice shaking but clear. "She works 12 hours a day, cleaning up after you. She comes home with her hands bleeding, and she still finds energy to help me with homework." The laughter died as if someone had thrown a switch. Did this child just Richard blinked, genuinely surprised? In 3 decades of building his empire through ruthless negotiation and calculated cruelty, no one had spoken to him like this. Especially not a barefoot 10-year-old who probably hadn't eaten breakfast. "I told the truth," Marcus continued. "You sit in chairs that cost more than everything my family owns. You talk about problems you can't solve, even though you pay fortunes. And you treat my mom like she's invisible because she cleans bathrooms." "Marcus, please." Elena's voice broke completely. She knew what was coming. Immediate termination. Industry blacklist. Months of job hunting while bills piled up like an avalanche. But something extraordinary happened. Instead of exploding in rage, Richard Blackwell smiled. It was the kind of smile that made intelligent people run in the opposite direction, a smile that promised refined. Calculated cruelty designed to maximize psychological suffering. "I like this kid," Richard announced, walking in slow circles around Marcus, like a shark evaluating prey. "He has guts." That makes what comes next so much more educational. He stopped in front of the digital display where the equation blazed. A multivariable logistics optimization, a problem with 200 interdependent variables that had defeated 3 weeks of expert consultation. "All right, little genius from the projects," Richard said, each word dripping with sweet poison. "You said you can solve this all by yourself? So I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for." A chance, he returned to his seat, settling in with theatrical slowness. "But this is too boring without interesting stakes. So here's the deal. If you actually solve that equation, and I mean a solution that works in the real world, not a child's scribblesile, triple your mother's salary immediately." The sound that escaped Alina was half sob, half strangled scream. Triple salary meant $2,400. a month instead of $800. It meant medical care for her diabetes. It meant getting Marcus out of the public school where gangs recruited 10-year-olds. It meant maybe, just maybe, being able to buy fresh meat instead of market scraps. And not just that, Richard continued, savoring each word like aged wine. I'll give her an administrative position. No more cleaning bathrooms? Her own office, computer, business cards with her name printed on them. Several board members exchanged glances. This was extraordinary generosity from a man legendary for paying minimum wage and extracting every cent of value from employees. But the word fell like a guillotine. When you fail, and you will, obviously fail because you're a 10-year-old, with no formal education pretending to understand mathematics that defeated MIT PhDs. Mother will be fired on the spot. He paused for perfect dramatic effect. And I will personally ensure she never works in this city again. I'll call every company, every building, every office, and tell them exactly why they shouldn't hire her. Because she brought her poorly raised son who interrupted an important meeting and then failed spectacularly, trying to pretend to be something he's not. The silence that followed was so absolute that Elena's tears hitting the marble floor were audible. No, Elena screamed, her voice shattering into 1,000 pieces. She pulled away from the wall and ran toward her son, but her legs trembled so badly she almost fell. Please, Mr. Blackwell, my son is just a child. He doesn't know what he's saying. Please, please don't play with our lives like this. She dropped to her knees in front of Richard, hands clasped in supplication that destroyed any trace of dignity. I'll do anything. I'll work 18 hours. I'll clean for free on weekends. Just please don't do this. Mom. Get up, Marcus said softly, moving to help her. Please don't kneel in front of him. But Elena couldn't stop sobbing, her body shaking with absolute terror of losing the only job that kept a roof over their heads. This is first-class entertainment. Leonardo Pierce, media executive, pulled out his phone. I'm recording this. The guys at the executive club are going to die laughing. This is unnecessary cruelty, whispered Sofia Ibarra, HR director, though her voice was so low nobody heard her. This is education, Richard corrected, having heard her anyway. I'm teaching the boy a valuable lesson about social hierarchies. Some people are born to lead companies. Others are born to clean their bathrooms. Better he learns now, before life teaches him more brutally. Marcus helped his mother stand, holding her, while she trembled like a leaf in a hurricane. He felt her tears soaking his patched shirt, heard her desperate sobs, and made the decision that would change both their lives forever. I accept, he said, his voice cutting through his mother's crying like a hot knife through butter. No, Marcus, no. Elena grabbed him desperately, trying to cover his mouth with her hands. Please, sweetheart, you can't. It's a trap. They're going to destroy us. But Marcus gently moved her hands aside. He looked directly into his mother's eyes that had seen too much pain, too much sacrifice. Anne said the words she needed to hear. Trust me, Mom. Like Dad taught you to trust. The mention of her dead husband made Elena release an animal sound of pure pain. She covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing so violently her entire body convulsed. Excellent. Richard clapped slowly, each clap echoing like a gunshot in the chamber of echoes. Leonardo, make sure to capture every second. I want to see the exact expression on the kid's face when he realizes he just destroyed his family. Walk toward the digital display with steps. That left almost invisible. Marks on Italian marbles so expensive that a single tile cost more than his family's monthly rent. The equation glowed before him in all its terrifying complexity. Multivariable logistics optimization with nonlinear constraints. Lambda variables. 50 interdependent restrictions. Graph theory combined with advanced calculus. The kind of mathematics that normally required specialized software and teams of experts. And now, they expected a 10-year-old to solve it with a marker. I need a marker, Marcus said simply. Richard gestured to an assistant, who placed a marker in Marcus's small hand with an expression of genuine pity. Everyone in that room knew they were witnessing the exact moment a family would be destroyed. Some felt guilt. Others felt morbid anticipation. None believed the boy had even the slightest chance. Marcus studied the equation. Seconds passed, then minutes. The silence in the room was so absolute that Elena's sobbing was the only sound audible, besides the distant hum of air conditioning. "He's already given up," Patricia muttered. "Poor thing doesn't even know where to start." "Give him 5 minutes to save some dignity before admitting defeat," Robert added, with something that almost resembled compassion, almost. But then Marcus raised the marker and began to write. Marcus's hand moved across the digital whiteboard with precision that seemed almost mechanical in its exactness. Numbers flowed in sequences that had their own logic, mathematical symbols appearing as if he were reading from an invisible book only he could see. The board members exchanged confused glances. What the child was writing didn't look like random scribbles from someone pretending to understand. It looked like real mathematics. "What is he doing?" Catherine whispered to Richard, leaning forward in her expensive chair. "Wasting everyone's time," Richard responded. But there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that definitely hadn't been there. 30 seconds ago, Marcus wrote for 1 full minute without stopping. Then 2, then 3. His hand moved with confidence that seemed impossible for his age. Equations transforming into other equations through clear, logical steps. Variables being systematically isolated. Substitutions appearing as if they were obvious by minute 4. Several executives had stood up and moved closer to the board, trying to follow what was happening. "Wait," Leonardo said, his voice having lost all its previous mockery. "He's using modified Cholesky decomposition to simplify the constraint matrix, and logarithmic transformation to linearize the nonlinear variables." That's exactly what our consultants should have tried," Sophia added, her eyes widening with each passing second. At exactly 5 minutes, Marcus stopped. He took a step back from the board, turned toward the 12 executives now watching him with expressions that had shifted from mockery to confusion to something approaching dangerous shock. "Done," he said simply. The marker fell from his hand, bouncing once on the floor before rolling to a stop at Richard Blackwell's feet. Richard stared at the marker, then at the boy, then at the board. Slowly, so slowly he seemed to be moving through molasses, he stood up. He walked toward the board. His eyes began scanning what Marcus had written. 5 seconds passed. Color began draining from his face. 10 seconds. His mouth opened slightly. 15 seconds. His hands began visibly trembling. 20 seconds. "No," he whispered. "This can't be. This is impossible. What's wrong?" Robert rushed over, followed by the other 11 executives. They crowded around the board like moths drawn to a flame about to burn them. Their expressions changed in waves. Confusion first, then intense concentration as they tried to follow the logic, then gradual comprehension, and finally absolute shock that left several literally open-mouthed. Catherine couldn't finish the sentence. "Possible," Patricia completed for her. "This is absolutely impossible." "Call Bergman," Richard ordered, his voice sounding hollow, emptied of all the arrogance it had held 5 minutes earlier. "Call the lead consultant now. Immediately." Marcus remained motionless, watching the adults who had humiliated him now, stumbling over themselves in growing panic. His expression was calm, too calm for someone 10 years old. Elena had frozen against the wall, unable to process what was happening. Her son had actually he really... 1 minute later, the room's giant screen lit up with a video call connecting to Dr. Heinrich Bergman, a 63-year-old German mathematician with a PhD from MIT who had led the consulting team that had failed for 3 weeks. "Villarreal, what's so urgent?" Dr. Bergman asked with evident irritation. "It was 3 a.m. in Munich. You woke me in the middle of... I need you to verify something." Richard interrupted, his voice shaking in a way his employees had never heard. "Now, it's critical." The phone camera focused on the board, transmitting it to the giant screen where Dr. Bergman could see it clearly. The mathematician adjusted his glasses. His eyes began moving methodically over the equations. 30 seconds of absolute silence. 60 seconds. Dr. Bergman's breathing had become audible through the speakers. 90 seconds. He began muttering in German words that sounded half prayer, half curse. 120 seconds. Mein Gott, Dr. Bergman finally whispered, his German accent becoming so pronounced with emotion that some words were almost unintelligible. Who wrote this? Who in your company has this level of brilliance you didn't tell me about? A child, Richard admitted, the words seeming to be physically torn from his throat. A 10-year-old boy. The silence that followed was so long, several thought the connection had dropped. Are you kidding me? Dr. Bergman finally said. A child? A child just solved in 5 minutes what my entire team, 52 people with, combined. Doctorate. Spent 3 weeks attempting unsuccessfully. Does it work? Catherine asked, her voice having lost all its previous venom. Does the solution actually work? Does it work? Dr. Bergman laughed. But it wasn't laughter of humor, it was laughter of someone who just witnessed something that defied everything they believed they knew about the world. This doesn't just work. It's brilliant. It's elegant. It's exactly the kind of solution you'd expect to see published in an academic journal. He leaned closer to his camera, eyes shining with excitement only another mathematician could fully understand. Look at this, he pointed at the screen. He used sub-problem decomposition that transforms the original non-linear problem into a series of linear problems that can be solved sequentially. That never occurred to us. And here, see this. He applied duality theorem in a way that reduces computational complexity from exponential to polynomial. In Spanish, please, Robert requested, completely lost. In Spanish, Dr. Bergman responded, his voice loaded with reverential admiration. This child just did in 5 minutes what should have required years of training in advanced mathematics. And not only that, his solution is better than anything we would have produced even with unlimited time. Richard's phone slipped from his hands, crashing against the marble with a sound that seemed to mark the end of an era. All eyes turned toward Marcus, who remained standing by the board with chalk marks on his fingers and an expression that was simultaneously triumphant and profoundly devastatingly sad. How? Richard finally managed to articulate, his voice coming out as a broken croak. How does a street kid know mathematics that defeats MIT PhDs? Marcus looked toward his mother, who watched him with an expression mixing pride, terror, love, and pain in equal proportions. And then he spoke the words that would change everything. Because my father was a tenured professor of applied mathematics at National University. Before he was fired for reporting that the dean was selling admission spots to rich families, children who were failing exams, revelation fell like a nuclear bomb over the room. After they fired him, no university would hire him because he was blacklisted. No consulting firm wanted him because he'd proven to be problematic. So he ended up giving private lessons to students in our home for $5 an hour. Tears began forming in Marcus's eyes, but his voice remained steady. For the last 3 years of his life, after my mom had to accept work cleaning bathrooms because we were the only source of income, Dad spent every free minute teaching me everything he knew. Mathematics, physics, logic, systems, theory. He said knowledge was the only thing nobody could take from us, no matter how poor we were. A tear fell down his cheek, then another. 6 months ago, he had a heart attack while teaching. The pain was so intense he couldn't move. We called an ambulance, but no public hospital had space that night. We called 5 private hospitals, but they all rejected us when we said we didn't have insurance. His voice broke completely. So my dad died on our house floor while I held his hand. And he made me promise I would never let the world convince me that being poor meant being stupid. The silence that followed was sacred. 12 of the most powerful and wealthy people in the country found themselves unable to make eye contact with a 10-year-old who had just exposed something fundamental about their souls. Alina slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, sobbing with violence that shook her entire body. These weren't tears of sadness. They were Tears of 3 years of contained pain, finally releasing in an unstoppable avalanche. "So yes," Marcus continued, wiping tears with the back of his hand, leaving a marker stain on his cheek. "I can solve your equation. I can solve many equations. But there's one problem I can't solve." Look directly at Richard Blackwell with eyes that burned. "With ancient wisdom born of suffering, I can't solve the problem of people. With money seeing people without money as entertainment, I can't solve the fact that my mom has to kneel and beg for her job after 6 years of cleaning your bathrooms without you learning her name. I can't solve the fact that my dad died because having principles is more dangerous than being corrupt." His voice grew louder, loaded with every gram of pain and rage he'd been containing. "My dad was right about one thing: knowledge can't be taken away. But he was wrong about something important. He said knowledge would make me free. But here I am, with all the education he gave me, still being treated like garbage because I was born in the wrong house, with the wrong family, with the wrong bank account." Richard Blackwell, a man who had built a technology empire by being ruthless in business and cruel to subordinates, who had humiliated hundreds of employees over decades, who had measured his success by how many people he could control, opened his mouth to speak and realized he had absolutely nothing to say. For the first time in 30 years, he was completely speechless. "The deal was," Marcus said, turning to face Richard directly, "that if I solved the equation, you'd triple my mom's salary and give her an administrative position." The silence stretched. Everyone waited to see what Richard would do when confronted with the consequences of his own cruel bet. And then, a soft but absolutely clear voice broke the moment. I propose something better." All eyes turned to the back of the room. The woman who had spoken was Valentina Ruiz, 42 years old, and her presence there was so unexpected that several executives literally blinked as if seeing a hallucination. Valentina Ruiz wasn't just another businesswoman, she was the founder and CEO of Tech Vision Solutions, the only real competition Richard Blackwell had faced in the last decade. Her company, valued at $500 million, had emerged from literally nothing, a woman who had started programming in public libraries. Because she couldn't afford university, nobody knew she was in the building, much less in this meeting. Valentina Richard pronounced her name like it was poison on his tongue. "What the hell are you doing here?" Valentina walked toward the center of the room with steps that resonated with absolute authority. She wore a suit that probably cost as much as Elena's monthly salary. But there was something in her posture that was completely different from the other executives. She walked like someone who remembered exactly where she came from. "Your assistant let me in 20 minutes ago," she explained, her voice calm, cutting like a surgical scalpel. "I came to discuss the merger proposal you rejected last week. But then I heard this." She pointed toward Marcus. "And I realized I was witnessing something much more important than any corporate merger." She stopped in front of Richard, looking him directly in the eyes with an intensity that made several in the room feel the temperature drop 5 degrees. "You know what I saw, Blackwell? I saw a man so blinded by his own ego that he almost destroyed the family of a genuine genius. I saw 12 people with more money than decency laughing at a child whose only crime was being born poor." "Careful what you say," Richard warned, his voice dangerously low. "You're in my building, in my boardroom. You're facing a child who just solved in 5 minutes what your $300,000 consultants couldn't solve in 3 weeks. Valentina responded without hesitation. "I think your building and your boardroom lost quite a bit of credibility in the last 10 minutes. The silence that followed was so tense it hurt. Valentina turned toward Marcus, and her expression changed completely. The hardness melted, replaced by something that looked like recognition mixed with ancient pain. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Marcus Chen," the boy responded, his voice still trembling from the emotional revelation he'd shared moments before. "Marcus," Valentina repeated, kneeling to be at his height. The gesture was so unexpected that Elena let out a sound of surprise. 28 years ago, I was you." She removed her expensive jacket, revealing the blouse underneath. Then, in a movement that left everyone open-mouthed, she rolled up her sleeve and showed her left forearm. There was a long scar running from her wrist to her elbow.
See this?
She asked, I got it when I was 14, working in an illegal textile factory. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for $50 a month. The industrial sewing machine caught my arm, and no hospital would treat me without upfront payment. Marcus stared at the scar with huge eyes. My mom was a cleaning lady. Exactly like yours, Valentina continued, each word loaded with contained emotion. My dad had died 2 years earlier in a construction accident that the company never acknowledged as their responsibility. So it was just the two of us against the world. She stood up but maintained eye contact with Marcus. The difference between you and me is that when I was your age, there was nobody like me now to intervene. Nobody who saw my potential through my poverty. I had to scratch, fight, and sacrifice 20 years of my life to get where I am. She turned toward Richard with an expression that was half defiance, half accusation. But you, Marcus, won't have to do that. Because I'm not going to let this man waste your talent or torture your family anymore. What exactly are you proposing? Catherine asked, her voice loaded with skepticism. Another act of corporate charity for the cameras? Not charity. Investment, Valentina corrected firmly. I propose this. Marcus and his mother come work for Tech Vision. Alina, I offer you a position as General Services Coordinator with a starting salary of $3,000 monthly. The number hit like lightning. $3,000 was almost 4 times what Alina currently earned. And Marcus, Valentina continued, I offer you something nobody else in this room has the vision to offer. Admission to the Young Talent Development Program I launched last year. Complete paid education, personal mentors, an opportunity to work on real projects while you study. That's theft, Richard exploded, his composure finally breaking completely. You came to my building to steal talent right in front of my face. I'm not stealing anything, Valentina responded with devastating calm. I'm offering opportunity to people you treated like garbage. There's a difference. She turned toward Alina, who was still on the floor, watching everything with the expression of someone who can't believe what's happening. Alina, right? Valentina approached and extended her hand. Stand up, please. Alina took her hand tremblingly, allowing Valentina to help her to her feet. Listen to me carefully, Valentina said, holding both of Alina's hands. I know exactly what you're feeling right now. The terror of losing work. The desperation of not knowing how you'll feed your son tomorrow. The humiliation of having to kneel before men who don't know your name after years of cleaning their messes. Tears began falling down Valentina's cheeks, surprising everyone in the room. My mom died cleaning a bank executive's bathroom. She was 52 years old, but her body seemed 80 from decades of work that destroyed her. When she needed urgent medical help, nobody responded in time. The horror of the revelation made several executives physically recoil. So when I say I understand, Valentina squeezed Elena's hands. It's not an empty phrase. I truly, genuinely understand. Elena broke completely. She collapsed into Valentina's arms, sobbing with an intensity that shook both women. And Valentina held her, allowing her to release years of contained pain. But this ends today, Valentina whispered in her ear, loud enough for everyone to hear. Today's the day your life changes. Not from charity, not from pity, but because your son is brilliant and you are strong. And those two things deserve to be recognized. Marcus watched everything with tears running down his face. But this time they weren't tears only of pain. They were tears mixed with something he hadn't felt in 6 months. Hope. Then something extraordinary happened. Richard Blackwell, the 52-year-old technology magnate, the man who had built an empire, being absolutely ruthless, who had never shown vulnerability in decades of career, sat in his expensive chair and began to cry. They weren't dramatic sobs. They were silent tears running down his face as he covered his eyes with one hand, his shoulders shaking with emotion he'd been burying for 52 years of life. The entire room froze in absolute shock. My son was his age, Richard finally managed to say between tears. When I decided that building an empire was more important than being present in his life, when I chose meetings over baseball games, When I lost everything that truly mattered, chasing money that never made me happy. He looked up at Marcus, his face completely destroyed. And now he's in another country, living with his mother. And he hasn't spoken to me in 7 years because I became exactly the kind of man you just rejected. The kind of man who measures human value in money. The kind of man who forgot to be human. The silence that followed was sacred. And then Marcus did something extraordinary. He walked toward Richard and extended his hand. "You can still change," he said softly. "My dad used to say, it's never too late to choose to be a better person." Richard looked at the small hand extended toward him. Then he looked into the eyes of the child who had just rejected his offer but now offered him something infinitely more valuable, forgiveness, and he shook his hand while continuing to cry. 3 months later, Marcus Chen stood in front of a building he'd never imagined visiting, the headquarters of TechVision Solutions. It wasn't the imposing, cold skyscraper of Titan Industries. It was a modern 10-story structure with glass walls that let in natural light. Vertical gardens covering an entire section, and at the main entrance, a plaque that read, "Talent has no zip code." Alina held his hand with a grip that spoke of mixed nervousness and excitement. For the first time in 6 years, she wasn't wearing a cleaning uniform. Valentina had sent her 3 professional outfits as a welcome gift. And now she wore a gray suit that made her look exactly like what she was about to become, an executive. The automatic doors opened, revealing a lobby completely different from any corporate space they'd seen. Employees of all ages and backgrounds worked in open spaces. There was a children's play area in one corner because Valentina believed parents worked better when they knew their children were safe and nearby. There was a cafeteria where food was subsidized so everyone could afford to eat well. And on the walls, enormous photographs of employees with their stories written below. Maria, former domestic worker, now director of operations. Chen arrived as a refugee without speaking Spanish. Now leads development team. And there, in the center, a new photograph was being installed. Marcus and Elena Chen, with text that read, "Knowledge has no social class. Brilliance has no price tag. Dignity has no discount." As for Richard Blackwell, he stood in his now empty office at Titan Industries, looking at a framed photograph on his desk, the first photograph he'd displayed in 30 years. It showed him and his son, taken 3 days ago during their first dinner together in 7 years. The road to reconciliation would be long. Trust broken over decades couldn't be rebuilt in weeks. But for the first time in years, Richard Blackwell was trying to be something other than rich. He was trying to be human.